We know that nature can help us heal physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Numerous studies and books have documented this. Stanford University researchers found quantifiable evidence that walking in nature can lead to a lower risk of depression in a study published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. There are books like the following: The Science of Nature's Influence on Your Health, Happiness, and Vitality, and The Biophilia Effect. Great conservationists who spend substantial time in nature also learn that nature can heal us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. John Muir wrote, "Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will drop away from you like the leaves of autumn." John Muir also stated, "And into the forest I go to lose my mind and find my soul." Henry David Thoreau wrote, "We need the tonic of wildness." There are a lot of positives with more people going out to connect with nature during these difficult times, but it has to be done responsibly and respectfully. Social distancing, carry out what you carry in, observe park rules, etc. With more people going outside, we have an incredible opportunity for more people to start developing direct and loving relationships with the natural world so that we can better take care of our planet going forward. Gratefully, because of your wonderful support, our Save Mount Diablo staff continue to work hard on conserving our critical natural world and foundation here, albeit remotely from their homes. Together, we will continue to do great things to protect the ultimate foundation for our long-term health and well-being. Today, we are so fortunate to have Darlene DeRose with us, who is certified in ecotherapy. She is a very thoughtful individual, and she will help us understand the theory and science behind the green therapy movement. Darlene will also provide you with practical steps you can take to help you cope with these challenging times. Darlene's presentation is about 45 minutes, and at the end, there will be a few minutes for questions via the Zoom chat box feature. Hover your mouse over the button of your screen, over the bottom of your screen, and a menu bar will appear. Click on the chat icon and a chat column will appear to the right of the screen. Click inside the comments box and type in your question. Darlene will get to as many of these questions as she can within the hour we have. Darlene, take it away. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy.
Great. Thank you, Ted, and thank you to Save Mount Diablo for this opportunity to share more information about nature and nature's healing benefits during our current crisis and our shelter in place. Before we begin, what I want everyone to do is to stop for a moment. If you want to close your eyes, do that. But I want you to imagine a place in nature where you feel the most calm and relaxed. It could be the mountains. Maybe it's the ocean. You could have a favorite hike. It could be your own backyard. It might be a place that you discovered over the last month that you keep being drawn back to. Have you ever wondered, as I have, what is going on in that particular place that allows you to relax and de-stress? That is the question that's at the core of our conversation today. So as we go through this presentation, think about how that favorite place in nature might be affecting you physically, mentally, spiritually. Okay, I'm trying to get my screen to advance here. Hang on. The purpose of today's conversation is to explore the evidence connecting nature and human health. We will talk about some background, the physical health benefits, the mental health benefits, the social health benefits, and some spiritual impacts. And then we will talk about some theories around it. I've tried to organize the study information in a way that it makes sense. There's a lot of information out there. So what I focused on is the findings that are considered central to this field of nature healing, or that are groundbreaking and really new. And I want to lay a framework so that everybody understands what's happening in their bodies. So let's go back to the idea of humans and nature. In prehistoric times, of course, human evolution was dominated by time spent in nature. And our ancestors actually had to learn how to survive in it. They had to avoid harm and find the best food, shelter, and other resources. There is evidence that Neanderthals even used herbs, potentially for healing purposes, but we're really not going to talk about herbalism because that is actually not part of the field of the green care movement. So we move into civilization and we begin to adopt belief systems about this connection between the natural world and humanity. I'm going to share just a few thoughts to say. In Eastern thought, there is an ancient Korean proverb called body and soil are one. I'm going to say that again because people often think body and soul are one. Body and soil are one. And this is a really interesting and relevant example that's led to a remarkable public healthcare initiative in Korea, which we'll talk about later. In the Hindu culture, nature is considered sacred because man depends on it. And one of the things that's come out of this belief system, and many of you may know this, is the Ayurvedic science of life system that really is a complete system linking nature and its regenerative forces.
Darlene, just wanted
Yes.
to let you know that you're not sharing right now.
I'm not sharing. How is
Right.
that possible?
So if you might want to restart your share, apologies.
Okay, let's go back and I'll restart the share. Is that sharing? Is it sharing now, Karen?
I don't see it.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me go back to the share screen. Hold on a moment. We will work this out, you guys.
Yes, we will.
We can do this.
There it is.
All right. Okay, we're going to just go through. Is that got it? Okay,
Yes.
good. All right, we're going to go back through to my beautiful pictures about our primal ancestors, our Eastern thought, and we're going to go to Western thought. Thank you, Karen. So now we're going to turn to the lineage that most of us share, which is Greek or Western thought. And actually the holistic healing philosophy of Greek medicine is actually that man is a product of nature or the natural environment. And health is actually living in harmony with nature. Disease takes place when that harmony and balance are upset. So it's Mother Nature that heals, nurtures, and supports life on this planet. The first Greek god was actually a goddess, Gaia, or Mother Earth, who created herself out of primordial chaos. And she is the entire ecosystem of planet Earth, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But Gaia is always trying to achieve balance. But despite this human history filled with the legacy of a deep, deep relationship and dependence on the natural world, we find ourselves in unprecedented times marked by a decline in human health, physical health, mental health, social health, maybe even spiritual health, and the deterioration of our planet. So many of us feel like this great Woody Allen quote, "I really love nature, I just don't want to get any of it on me." And this decline and this thought has actually led to the theory that we suffer and our planet suffers and we are sick because we have disconnected from nature. So those of us in the field of eco-psychology argue that our health issues and our personal and planetary issues are really a direct result of this disconnection. And there's been an emergence of activity around a focus on nature-based healing. The interest in this field has grown considerably since I finished my certification in 2015. We've actually reached the point where researchers are doing studies now on the neural impact of nature on the human, in addition to the behavioral and biological impact. Books are now becoming very commonplace. Some of these may be ones you recognize. Magazines are becoming very commonplace with articles, some of the more prominent ones, National Geographic, Scientific American. And there have actually been so many studies done now about the impact of nature on human health that they're doing what are called meta-studies. And meta-studies, for those of you who don't know, are simply studies of studies. So there's so many studies and so much information that they accumulate them and they look at all the constant findings. And that's really an indication of how much research is now out there. So we're going to move to the first topic, which is the physical health. And here we say, can nature make my body healthier? The simplest way to look at that is to examine a meta-study. Again, a meta-study is just a study of studies that came out of the United Kingdom. And these were the populations that were studied in that publication. And when researchers look at this, what they're doing is they're tracking physiological markers. So they're looking at what happens to cortisol levels, what happens to blood pressure, what happens to heart rate, what happens to electrodermal activity. These are the physiological conditions that they're looking at. We're going to go back and look at the first and most important seminal study on this topic, which was actually in 1984, a long time ago. And this was a study done by Roger Ulrich, who is a psychologist. When we think about what happens in hospitals now, most of us take for granted that looking at a hospital window on a green landscape is better than not looking at it a green landscape. In other words, you always want the outside bed, not the inside bed. But before 1984, most medical professionals did not actually think that was relevant at all. And what Roger Ulrich did was he looked at patients after gallbladder surgery, and he used the first experimental controls in this field that looked at nature and the healing benefits. And what he found was that patients who had a view of greenery outside their window stayed fewer days in the hospital after surgery. They required less pain medication. And my favorite, they were reported by nurses as having better attitudes. So it's because of the Ulrich study that hospital gardens are back in vogue, and that many assisted living facilities and retirement communities actually now make the design of outdoor space to be as important as indoor space. In 1993, he extended his study with some colleagues in Sweden, and they looked at heart surgery patients this time, and they put them in 6 different conditions after surgery. 2 of the conditions involved images of nature. They weren't actually these images, but one was actually a tree-lined stream, and the other one was a dark forestry scene. And then the other 4 were abstract paintings, white walls, or nothing. And what they discovered, that people who were actually assigned the water and tree scene, so technically not the one on the left, but the one on the left in this picture, were less anxious after surgery and required fewer doses of pain medication than all the other conditions. So although images of, I don't know what this is doing, of nature won't cure your illness, they do affect pain and stress responses, and the reduction in pain and stress allows your immune system to do its work. So the next time somebody gives you a coffee table book with nature images on it and you are sick, don't leave it on the coffee table, pick it up because it will help you. So staying on this theme of stress and recovery, here are the findings of 2 other studies. One study, again done by our favorite Roger Ulrich, exposed subjects to stressors, and he assigned these subjects to different recovery environments. One recovery environment was a natural one, and one was an urban one. And he examined physiological markers, because we're still talking about physical benefits. And what the study revealed was individuals who are in the natural environment for recovery actually experienced significant physiological changes. So they had decreased blood pressure, decelerated heart rates, decreased muscle tension. But those in the urban recovery environment, in fact, did not have that result, and in some cases, those were increased. Then there was a second study, which I think is really interesting, that even 5 minutes in nature before a stressor occurs, so you know you're going to be in a stressful environment, results in more rapid recovery after the stress event. So we're staying on the topic of nature healing stress, and we're going to turn to some of the most exciting studies being done about nature healing on the physiological level. Japan and Korea lead the world right now on studying the impact of trees on human health. This is called forest bathing. Some of you may have heard of it. This forest bathing work is actually funded by the governments, both in Japan and South Korea. And you might say to yourself, why is this coming out of Japan and South Korea? Well, it turns out that Korea has the highest suicide rate in the world, and Japan has the third highest suicide rate in the world. And even in the 80s, before this all began, workers actually started to drop dead from work stress in Japan. They had a name for it. It was called death from overwork. So that led to this initiative. And what they've been finding is that the idea of forest bathing is you go into the forest and you cultivate all the senses, the smell, the sound, the feel, all of the senses. Most of the forests are hardwood, citrus, hardwood, cypress, and other evergreens. And they have found that walks in the forest lower cortisol levels by 12%, decrease that fight or flight, the sympathetic nerve activity by 7%, reduce the heart rate, reduce the blood pressure. And then in Korea, they found that using essential oils, in addition to those things, fights skin disease and reduces asthma. But for me, I think one of the most interesting things out of these studies is the impact of forest bathing on cancer. So many of you know that when an individual has cancer, their natural killer immune cells are not doing their jobs. They're not eradicating the cancer cells. And it turns out that forests actually have an impact on those cells as well. Time in the forest actually increases natural killer immune cell activity by up to 40%. Studies done of individuals who live near increased forest coverage show that their mortality rates go down due to cancer. And they did a study where they tracked the natural killer immune cells of women with breast cancer, and they are increased after a 2-week forest stay, and they stay elevated as long as 14 days. When I was, so first of all, you don't really want to be in the hospital, especially now, right now, and you're not planning a trip to Japan, probably not now, right now. So how do you translate that now into our current day? I was putting together the last little slides of this presentation, and I came across a study that was done just last year out of Michigan that was really interesting and really applicable to what we're talking about. So what they don't know, in most of these studies, they bring people in and there's a specific laboratory thing, time, place, and all that. And what they did in Michigan was they said, well, what is the shortest amount of time and what is the place in which this nature thing can work? And what it describes in this particular study is, what is the impact on nature on the cortisol levels? They did 2 physiological markers basically related to cortisol. And it was the first study that has allowed people to pick where they want to have the nature experience and how long they have the nature experience, as long as it was past this duration of 10 minutes, and what time of day. So it isn't prescribed now. And what they discovered is that for those of us who sometimes have trouble, making time for self-care, that actually between 20 and 30 minutes has a remarkable impact on our cortisol levels, up to a 20% drop per hour on our cortisol levels. So we're going to turn to mental health now, and mental health is actually the question, does nature make me happier, smarter, more creative? Despite the idea that Roger Ulrich did all these window studies on physiological markers, most of the work has actually been done in this field of mental health. I want to split the mental health discussion into 2 parts. They've looked at cognitive mental health as well as emotional. So cognitive is really just, how productive am I? How creative am I? Can I focus? Can I remember things? And then emotional is all about depression, anxiety, self-esteem, happiness, quality of life. And they've studied both, of course. These are the populations that have been most aggressively studied: people with ADHD, depression, dementia, mixed mental illness, schizophrenia, PTSD, addiction, and psychosis. And no surprise, hopefully, to anyone on this call, what they've discovered is that the emotional mental health benefits of natural surroundings are significant. General mental well-being is increased, depression, anxiety, and stress are reduced. People feel more confident and better moods, more calm, happy, and they feel more secure. The reports out of the United Kingdom also talk about the fact that there are some other things going on when we look at mental health benefits. Don't get too caught up in this particular slide. It's a little bit busy, but I want to point out to you that there are 3 things that they point to that are healing benefits when in nature. The first one is what they call direct benefits. That's the natural surroundings, the green circle. How our psychological restoration happens, how our stress is reduced, how we feel more calm and safe. But there are also 2 really important elements we'll talk about a little later in specific examples. One is the social context, so it's an indirect benefit, and this is where you feel part of a group. You're having contact, you're hiking with a buddy, you feel belonging because you're working in a garden with other people. The other indirect impact is meaningful activities. I learned how to do something in the garden I didn't know how to do. I'm responsible for taking care of a plant, so there's some indirect impacts as well. So how does this work? We're going to start by talking about actually being in nature, and then I'll move on to viewing it and hearing it. The simple activity, a nature walk, something all of us can do simply right outside our door. Here's what researchers have found. Have you ever felt less angry or stressed after you've taken a walk? This is one of the findings. A walk in nature reduces stress, and it serves as a restorative reprieve from stress. Have you ever had this experience where you walk in nature to solve a problem or have an aha moment? This is another finding, which is called the cognitive impact. So nature, what it does is it triggers the default network, and that's the network that's actually credited with creativity and insight. It also improves memory and attention skills. And the third finding about walking in nature is if you've ever been in a funk, which some of us may have been over the last month, and you take a walk in nature, that is the positive emotional impact of nature. So let's look at that one more closely for a moment. It turns out that nature has an impact on that looped pattern of thought that we can get into when we're worried, sad, or depressed. It's called rumination. It is associated with a heightened risk of depression. And depression is considered one of the most common mental disorders in the United States. In fact, it's connected very strongly with urbanization, people who don't have access to green space. So in this particular study, healthy participants were asked to take a 90-minute walk in a natural setting. There were people who walked in nature and people who walked in urban environments. And they did 2 things after the walk. One was they asked them, are you thinking negative thoughts less? So that's called reported results. And people, in fact, said they were thinking less negative thoughts. But kind of more intriguingly for me, they then did neurological tests to see whether or not those parts of the brain involved in rumination, that looped pattern of negative thinking, were affected. And lo and behold, they did discover that those parts of the brain showed less activity. So not only were people reporting negative thinking less, the brain was actually doing it less. Gardening is another way that brings us out in nature. One study shows that over 70% of US households actually garden. And gardening has been shown to improve cognitive and emotional health, so both sides of the things we've talked about. And it's also really interesting because gardening has been shown to have an impact on dementia. Regular gardening has been shown to reduce the risk of developing dementia, in addition to actually calming individuals who are already in a dementia condition. And that might explain, to some degree, some of the strong interest in this particular area. Let's not forget about gardening with kids. There have been a lot of studies done with children, gardening with children. And the 3 key findings that come out of this are, first of all, children will eat what they grow. And that means generally that there's more healthy eating going on. They also discovered that students who participated in a one-year gardening program actually increase social and interpersonal skills. They work better in groups, basically. And my all-time favorite, which I use whenever I talk to individuals who have children sort of in the middle school to high school area, is students who participate in gardening activities score higher on science achievement tests than those who do not have that available to them. And the last little piece on children, there have been a lot of studies done on ADHD and nature, and there was a questionnaire study that was done some years ago that was distributed nationally, and children lived in all different areas, suburban, urban, rural, and what they basically said is, your child has ADHD, where are they spending their time after school, in the summer, or on the weekends? And what they discovered was that actually after time spent in nature, children with ADHD improve their ability to focus on unappealing tasks. They complete them, they listen and follow direction, and they resist distractions. So let's go back for a moment to the window studies. And this brings us to viewing nature. So now we're not in nature anymore. We're not gardening or walking or in those forest environments. We're actually just viewing it out the window. So window studies have been done now in all sorts of sites, schools, office buildings, housing projects. And what they've discovered, you're not going to be surprised, is that nature viewing supports increased productivity, less job stress, higher academic scores, and less aggression in any sort of inner city residents, which we will loop back to. It's quite interesting. Some of the most interesting studies come out of the University of Illinois. And they did actually do a study where they looked at children in a public housing development, and they tested them on 3 components of self-discipline. Can you concentrate? Can you inhibit your impulsive behavior? Can you delay gratification? And what they discovered was that girls with green views, okay, remember green views now, we're not in nature, we're looking out the window, actually score higher than girls with less green views, but they showed no link between those events, those activities with the boys. And what they actually, the researchers concluded that is that boys actually spend less time at home playing and more outside the environment, so they're less affected by what they're seeing out their windows. Another study in 2016 looked at high school students and academic performance. Researchers went to 5 high schools and they administered several tests which apparently stress high school students out. One of them was giving a speech. Another was a mental math exercise. And the last one was a proofreading exercise. And then they separated the students into 3 different views. You could look at a green landscape, you could look out at a built landscape, or you could have no window whatsoever. And what they discovered was if you looked out on a green landscape, you actually perform better on tests, and should not surprise you now, you recover from the stress better afterwards. So I love the idea that being in nature makes you feel good. I love the idea that looking at nature makes you feel good. But what I really kind of got intrigued by was that not only viewing nature, but hearing it has an impact on the human condition. Joshua Smith is a biobehavioral health psychologist, and he studies how nature sounds can affect you. So what he does is he stresses out his subjects. Hope you see a pattern here. And he asks them to do public speaking or math tests. And then he afterwards put them in 3 different recovery exercises. One was a nature video that had nature sounds. Now again, pick up that that's not outside. That's a nature video with nature sounds. A nature video with motorized sounds and nature sounds, or just sitting in a quiet room peacefully. And then he recorded cortisol levels and heart rate variability. And what he discovered was that actually even 20 minutes of nature sounds will actually provide restorative benefit. And he claims for those of you who have trouble meditating, that that is the way to go. There was another study done about nature sounds and mood recovery where they actually exposed students to an unsettling video, asked them how they felt afterwards, and then they randomly assigned them to either natural sounds or nature sounds and motorized sounds. And again, no surprise, that participants that were exposed to natural sounds did actually have mood recovery, where those that listened to nature sounds mixed with motorized sounds did not. So how does this work? How do nature sounds actually impact our well-being? One study actually looked at the neurobiological mechanisms underlying the way that nature exposure alters us. So what it basically did was track EEG results, and it focused on heart rate variability. And what they found is there are 3 key sounds in nature that have a huge impact on our restorative abilities. The first, so if you want to be guessing in your mind, the first is water. So it's the whoosh sound of water that actually is considered a sound of non-threat, and it will calm the mood. The second sound is wind, and wind is considered actually a pink noise. It's a lower frequency than white noise, but it's also something that calms and kind of indicates don't worry. And the last one is birdsong. And birdsong, we associate mornings with birdsong, alertness, safety. And there is also evidence that humans and birds have co-evolved language centers, which means basically we were evolving language centers simultaneously, and so that there is an affinity with birdsong. So we're going to move into the social health benefits, and here we're asking ourselves, does nature support community? And if so, does that bring any healing benefits? So remember, I talked about this Natural England report. And that report also looked at some social health benefits in addition to mental health ones. And what they looked at was the dysfunctional effects of living in urban environments. What they've discovered is that natural environments in close proximity to urban environments can buffer the stress of them. So if you have a park or a green space or a planted area very close to an urban area, it actually can buffer the stress of them. So why do we care? How does that show up? How does that affect social health? Well, the Illinois laboratory that does this work actually has discovered by studying Chicago housing projects that apartments that have these views, this is not the specific view, but you get the idea, actually report higher levels of psychological aggression and violence compared to individuals who have views out their windows of this. And what they discovered is that individuals that have the view on the right with the greenery, they actually have lower numbers of assaults, homicides, vehicle thefts, burglary, and arson. So yes, greenery has been found to reduce crime. The greener that a building's surroundings are, the fewer total crimes, specifically 48% fewer property crimes and 56% lower violent crimes. Greenery also supports community. So remember that one slide that we had with the 3 circles on it, and I said, don't get too hung up, but we'll return here. So the researcher in Illinois that's been looking at this material says she doesn't think that nature's doing something, but that actually nature's bringing people out where they actually have an indirect connection that creates community, feel included, feel a sense of belonging, and that actually fosters social healing and reduces the crime. This happens particularly in gardens and community gardens. I do a lot of community garden works in Contra Costa County, and what you see is that people who are struggling to create community come together to garden, and they start to solve problems that have nothing to do with the garden because they've already created cohesive community within the garden. So we're going to move over to spiritual impacts. And the question here is, does nature make me feel part of something bigger? And if so, how does that help any healing benefit? There has been a huge amount of interest and scientific following in the last 10 to 15 years about the science of awe. And awe has been shown to have what they call a primordial basis. And what that means is it's actually hardwired, pre-cultural, and it's part of our evolution of our central nervous system. So it is part of our very being. It has 2 qualities, say the key researcher. One is that it's a sense of perceived vastness, something that is so much greater than ourselves. Think the Grand Canyon. Think of the most beautiful ocean you've ever seen. That is vastness, something bigger than we are. And it also has a sense that we need to assimilate that experience into ourselves. Like, I had to understand when I was at the Grand Canyon, like, oh, this is how it was developed. Oh, this is how it came to be, because I needed to make it make sense in my head. So those are two key elements. But why would we be talking about awe when we're talking about the healing benefits of nature? Where does this fit with spiritual healing? Well, it turns out that many people are either awakened to or strengthened in their spiritual healing by experiences in the natural world. There are so many writers and so many individuals who write about the transformational impact of nature. Ted mentioned some of the individuals, but think Henry David Thoreau, think John Muir. These are the people that were really moved in the natural world and really felt a connection to whatever the divine was for them. Awe in nature does not have to be connected to spiritual or sacred, but it often is. And the quotes on this page say it better than I could say it. The first one is from Richard Louv, who we'll talk about. He wrote a book called, he actually was the one that defined the term nature deficit disorder. And what he says is, nature introduces us to the idea, to the knowing, that we are not alone in this world and that realities and dimensions exist alongside our own. And then the second quote is from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a transcendentalist in the 1800s. And he wrote, in nature, currents of the universal being circulate through me. If those aren't spiritual quotes, I don't know what are. So researchers are now looking at the physical impacts of awe and that spiritual moment to see what it does to the human body. What they seem to be finding is that when we experience awe, it affects what's called the vagus nerve, which is just a trigger in our parasympathetic nervous system. And what it does is it slows the heart and quiets the body, leading to the ability of the body to heal. It also has an anti-inflammatory effect, which protects the body from chronic disease. It also has really interesting cognitive impacts. And one of the most interesting cognitive impacts to me is that it expands the perception of time. When you are sitting in a place of awe, you actually feel that you have more time. You have less pressure, you're less impatient. It increases our creativity. And what's fascinating is they did a study on the social impacts of awe. And what they did was they had a college campus, bunch of kids, they do the laboratory experiment, they send them off, and the kids think the experiment is over. It's not. And on their way back from the experiment, they run across someone who drops an entire box of pens. Those students who had had an experience of awe were more likely to stop and help than those who had not. So think about the impacts of awe on our ability to have social interaction and social connection. So awe actually has spiritual healing benefits. It invokes a sense of majesty, allows us to see the bigger picture of life. Some people say it serves as existential therapy, and all of that can be transformed into the healing benefits. So if any of you are like me, you'd be saying, this is all super cool, but how does this work? So we're going to just talk about the theories behind this healing benefit thing. There are two main theories, or should I say 4 theories, 2 categories. The first 2 are restorative, which are called attention restoration theory and stress recovery theory. The others are what's called psychoevolutionary, and those are the last 2 we'll talk about. So restorative theories. Here's the theory. Stephen and Rachel Kaplan wrote a book called The Experience of Nature, A Psychological Perspective. And what it talked about is that our attention is split into 2 parts. We have directed attention. This is the attention when you try to solve a problem, focus on a task, complete something. And then we have undirected attention, or involuntary attention, where it's just you get to float, and it's captured. Your attention is captured by whatever it's captured. The problem, they say, is that when we are focusing so hard with our directed attention, we actually work it to the point of fatigue. And when we are fatigued, it has mental, physiological, and social impacts. So they believed that actually the solution to those depleted resources is to engage the involuntary attention. Let that directed attention rest and engage the involuntary attention. And that is what actually nature is doing, according to the Kaplans. So basically, you're out walking and you see a butterfly, and all of a sudden your brain is like, butterfly, oh, that's beautiful, or pretty purple flower, oh, that's beautiful. Your involuntary attention has actually been captured, and that directed attention gets to go away, it gets to relax. I don't want to spend too much time on the one with the brain in it, but I just wanted to tell, for those of you who really love the science, that really what they're discovering from a neurological basis is that EEG results show that when you're in nature, there's less energy coming from the prefrontal cortex. And when that quiets down, the default mode network kicks in. And it's the default mode network that literally allows you to have the creative insights. So the second theory here is actually our friend Roger Ulrich. It's called stress recovery. Interestingly, Roger Ulrich was a student of the Kaplans, and he thought they were right, but he thought they approached it wrong. And what he said that is that stress is an obstacle to healing. Remember, he focused on patients coming out of surgery in hospitals. And he said, when you're in stress, you have physical effects. You know, you have all these things that your physical capabilities are reduced. There's intrusive procedures, so there's all the physical stress going on. But there's also psychological stress. So you feel helpless, you feel anxious. And he said, when we're stressed, our physical and our psychological put us at greater risk. And according to him, what we need to do is actually to focus on relaxing the body for the brain to actually result. So what he says is that natural environments actually reduce the stress in the body, and by the beauty and the joy of viewing stress, then our brains can actually come back alive. So we're going to turn to the psychoevolutionary theories. The first one relates to this book that Richard Louv wrote, Last Child in the Woods. And what he wrote in it was, our society is teaching young people, this is 2005 now, gang, this is 15 years ago. Our society is teaching young people to avoid direct experience in nature. His theory at the time was more psychological in nature. He did not try to do scientific results, but he said, reduced time outside for our young people increases childhood obesity, it increases depression, it causes behavioral conduct disorder, and it creates anxiety. And if you think about those, increase in obesity, physical, increase in depression, emotional, behavioral conduct disorders, social problems, anxiety, potentially spiritual. So for him, the problem is we don't get out in nature enough, and the solution is to get back out in nature. So when you think about that slide I showed earlier, I love nature, I just don't want to get any of it on me. This is exactly the problem he's saying we have, is that we don't actually want to engage with nature, and that's part of what's going on. Since he actually wrote that book 15 years ago, there has been an extraordinary amount of scientific studies that have been done that link nature and health to look at this nature deficit disorder. And it actually has been shown to diminish the use of the senses, lack of time in nature, to cause attention difficulties, to increase obesity, and to show higher rates of emotional and physical illness. And the last bullet on this one, which is near and dear to everybody who loves Save Mount Diablo, is that research suggests that nature deficit weakens ecological literacy. We don't understand the natural world if we're not in it, and it weakens stewardship of it. We don't care for it if we're not in it. So this is a really huge finding for those of us who love nature and we want to continue to protect it. The second psychoevolutionary theory is what's called biophilia, and Ted alluded to that in his introduction. Two things I want to say about it. Erich Fromm, who was a psychologist, coined the term, and all it means is the passionate love of life and all that lives. That's what it means, biophilia. We love, as humans, everything that's alive. And interestingly, along comes Edward Wilson, who is not a psychologist now, he's a biologist, in '84, and he says, wait a minute, I agree with that, but moreover, I think it's genetic. It's built into us. So our going way back to our ancestors, when we had to survive in nature, we had to understand nature, we had to actually love nature, that's built into our DNA as it is. So how does that show up? How is that built into our DNA? Where does that happen? Just going to do a quick scan through the nature, through the senses. And this is just a, you're going to come up with many more than I did, but gardening, which is touch, viewing nature, which is sight, tasting nature, which is food, bird song, forest bathing. We're going to just talk about them for a minute. And we're going to start with smell. So the first thing I want to say is that plants, remember plants are nature, communicate using fragrances. And biologists that specialize in this actually claim that they have decoded at least 200 fragrance words, and they expect many, many more will follow. And smell, interestingly, is the only sense that is not actually filtered by the cortex of the brain. It goes directly into the response center of the brain. So we cannot consciously control our reaction to a smell. What's interesting about the smell piece of this, and this is why I chose it, is if you go back to the forest bathing I talked about, the impact of smell is a critical element in the healing benefit. It turns out that trees release volatile substances that actually enter the primal brain immediately, have an effect on the body, and that is where the healing is happening. It is the smell and the substance reaction to that, to the reaction of the body to that substance, that actually enhances the natural killer immune cell activity. So we're going to move on to just quickly talk about sight. It turns out, for those of you who remember what fractals are, they're those complicated patterns that are actually quite organized, but they look convoluted. I'm actually going to show you, these are fractals right here. So you would recognize many of those, and those are considered fractal patterns. It turns out that the human eye is branched into fractals, and they believe that's because it's a good, efficient search strategy. And when you have a match between your fractal number, it's a scale, with something you are looking at, it actually impacts your brain waves. It calms you down. So remember way back when I said, think of the place you love in nature. Think of something that really calms you down. Well, it could be smells, right? You could have gone to the forest. It could be the smells. It could be that there are some beautiful elements there that match your eye's fractal pattern. And the gentleman who does this study talks about the fact there's a physiological resonance between the human eye and the fractal pattern. And so the stress reduction is actually when that resonance occurs. Alpha brain waves get produced. Brain regions with long-term memory are activated, and emotion is better regulated. There's also a connection between hearing and human healing. So the environment actually does increase parasympathetic activation and reduce the fight or flight. So we talked about birdsong in that way. There's also a link between sounds of nature and the ability to recover from stress. We talked a little bit about that as well. There have been studies that actually show that if you put people into virtual forests with sounds of birdsong and water, that you will actually have stress reduction. Taste. I'm not going to do too much on taste because there's not a lot of work being done in this area. It's a completely different field than the green care movement. But I do want to say that food speaks to us through taste. And humans have largely relied upon taste to figure out, do I eat this or is it toxic? Do I not eat? And there are a lot of nutritionists who will say that really when we're tuning into the foods we want to eat, we're actually tuning into the natural wisdom of the body. But we're going to end this part with touch, because touch and gardening is actually a way to literally physically unite with nature and tap into that genetic affinity, that biophilia. And there's a beautiful quote that I have here that gardening, I am a gardener in case y'all didn't figure that out, awakens a primal urge that many of us have to connect with the soil a primal urge to connect with the soil. By putting your hands in the soil, you can physically unite with nature on an elemental level. So how are we in affinity with nature using touch? There was a study, a very exciting study done in 2007, which actually used mice. It wasn't humans, used mice, and they actually injected them with a particular bacteria. And that actually found that that injection of bacteria stimulated the serotonin levels in the mice. Okay, so it had antidepressant behavioral effects on the mice. So what ran through the field at that time was the fact that soil is the new Prozac, that putting our hands in soil is anti-inflammatory and antidepressant. Before I go to a summary, there was a book that I just saw yesterday that Richard Louv has come out with, and it's called Vitamin N for Nature. And he has a whole lot of activities, essays, informational websites, advice on how we can actually go out in the natural world. Kind of refers all the way back to that study that was done in 2019, like how many minutes, because we're all so efficient, how many minutes do I need to be in nature to have the impact? What can I do? This book apparently covers a lot of that. I have not read the book yet, so I can't talk about it. So before I go to the final summary, I want to say that there are some really, really practical things we can all do, if you all haven't figured this out, to actually take advantage of the healing benefits of nature. We can walk, simply walk, take a walk, and that will, you know, do all the, it gets us out of the depression, the rumination, gives us creative ideas, and so on and so forth. We can sit for 20 to 30 minutes, anywhere we choose, any time of day. That's what that study showed. Anywhere we choose that we consider nature, any time of day. We can garden, sticking our hands in the soil if we can. We can go out and take pictures. I have a practice that I do with my clients that I call, it's called Eyes of the Heart. And it's actually taking a camera out into the natural world and receiving the image from the natural world. Not trying to take a picture from the natural world, but simply receiving images. And you will be stunned at the types of images that get captured by your viewfinder. You can journal. For those of you who journal, entering nature with a quiet mind, a quiet heart, and just write what flows. That has a huge positive impact on the body. And now you understand it's affecting your brain waves. It's affecting your attention span. It's affecting your heart rate. It's affecting your cortisol level. All these activities are so simple, but they have a huge effect. So just a quick summary. Nature offers healing benefits in all these ways: physical, mental, social, spiritual. Some of the healing comes out of our biological connection. They've shown it to be neurologically connected. There's a lot of psychology behind it. And I do believe there's a spiritual longing to reconnect. But regardless what you choose to do, how you choose to do it, we all have access to nature's healing benefits in simple, really readily available ways. I will tell you that I took a group, small group, to honor social distancing to the park a week or so ago. And I told them, all I want you to do is lie in the grass and count the clouds. That's all I want you to do. And the level of stress that was reduced in that group was ridiculously good. So if you can think of nothing else, go outside in a park, in your yard, anywhere, and count the clouds like we used to when we were kids. So thank you. Don't know if we have questions, but I'm open for them.
Karen, you're on mute. You have to take yourself off mute.
Yes, I was in the middle of unmuting myself. Sorry about that. I have a good question here from Dawn Lezak.
Okay.
Okay, she's asking, what about studies related to the hardness of nature? By that, I mean it calls upon humans to have grit, endurance, willingness to be physically tested by nature. to be scared, resilient? I ask this because it seems like we are creating alternative forms of nature, contained ones, virtual ones. Sometimes I feel we may be losing a lot of benefits by this virtual nature / window nature.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for that. There is actually a lot of disagreement in the field about whether we can call anything natural anymore, because there has been so much human intervention in almost every portion of the planet. That is there any original nature existing? That's the argument. But in direct response, there is in my field, when I was trained in ecotherapy, there are 3 areas that we are trained in: horticultural therapy, which is where I gravitate, so plants; animal-based therapy, so that's the obvious, the cats, the horses, the dogs, there's even pig therapy. But the one that would interest you the most is wilderness therapy. And wilderness therapy gets exactly to what you're talking about, the grit of being out in the natural world, surviving in it, using the skill sets that we once had, being able to be cold, being able to be hot, being able to be wet. That's actually a huge portion of ecotherapy. So thank you for that.
Okay, I have one more from Gary Stein. Have there been any studies to show how long we need to be in nature per week to have lasting effects on the psyche and ongoing well-being?
So I think the closest, I will say, I'm not certain, the closest I can come to was that one particular study that I mentioned that came out of Michigan in 2019 that said 20 to 30 minutes a day, I think was what they actually said. Theirs was 3 times a week, excuse me, it was 3 times a week that had the healing benefits. Mm-hmm. So most of the studies seem to be specific to time and place without being prescriptive. But I would say that's probably the only one that I have seen, not that there aren't any others, but that 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a week is the lasting and healing benefits that they seem to be talking about.
Great. We could probably take one more question. Oh, here, Anne Bremer. How can we reconcile the biophilia hypothesis, everyone innately loves nature, with people who are really scared to be outside in nature?
Wow. So I think what I would say to that is a great question, is our fear of being outside in nature a trained response? Have we been taught that nature is scary, that nature can harm us, that nature has negative impacts on us? What first pops in my mind, because it was I didn't go into this, but there was a huge impact on the psyche when the Black Plague came through in the 1300s, I think it was, because people got scared at the impact of nature on human existence at that time. So many people died. Mm-hmm. So I think that we have had learned responses that have been handed down through the generations, and we're trying to control nature because we're afraid of it. And I think that is the healing, that is the undoing we're trying to do to heal.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's great. Yeah, we just had a comment from Martin Steinpress that if people are afraid of nature, they need guides to become comfortable. That's wonderful.
Thank you, Martin. That's a good, very good comment.
Okay, since we're at 4 o'clock, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. This is our first Zoom presentation, and we really appreciate that you all are all here. We learned a little bit, and make sure everything runs smoothly, if not more smoothly in the future. You will get an email from us with some links. We'll have a recording of the presentation, and also if you need to contact or would like to contact Darlene, you can totally do that. And she has also been gracious enough to share her slide presentation, so we can share that with you as well. And I am Karen Ferrier. I'm Development Director at Save Mount Diablo, and I will share my contact information as well. And thank you all for your time. I hope that all of you are doing okay during this time, and look out for some upcoming web presentations in the next few weeks. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Darlene, very much.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.